Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
What's the advice for how often somebody should be checked in a kind of voluntary capacity that's working with children and young people? I've known some trustees say, 5 years is fine, 3 years is fine. There's different people that pull these numbers out of the hat, and there isn't necessarily some legal advice on it. What are you guys recommending for a very practical thing like that for a church?
Okay, well, I mean, firstly to say you're absolutely right, Gavin, that there is nothing enshrined in law around that. So a good practice, in our view, is that DBS Check should be reviewed on a 3-yearly cycle.
Yeah,
you're right, and some will operate to 5 years. Our view is that 3 really is where we should pitch it. And the reason that we say that is because the world moves on so quickly. So not only do the expectations that we might have of different team members change, the ways in which we deliver different forms of support and ministry, they change as well. And frankly, a DBS check is only essentially valid the day it's issued. It says on this day in time, the criminal record says this. Yeah.
It's
so
a snapshot, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And that is all it is, which is why I think it's important to remember that DBS is part of a broader, safer recruitment process. And the other elements are of equal importance. But going back to the DBS refresh, 3 years, really, we kind of think beyond that, you're inviting unnecessary risk, actually. So that's what we would suggest. And of course, that's not to say that if somebody moves from one role to another, and the role that they've moved to is sufficiently different from the one they've come from, that in itself shouldn't trigger the need for a DBS check. So let's say a person moves from a ministry role focused on children and young people, and they move towards providing some kind of pastoral care to older people. That's a completely different kettle of fish. So that in itself should trigger a new check if indeed the role that they're moving to meets eligibility for that. And again, our team, so our disclosure helpline, which is separate to our safeguarding helpline, they are always there to help answer those questions. Is eligibility met? What's the best way for us to go about doing this? Should we seek another check in this scenario that we're looking at? That's what they're there for. So, make use of them.
Make use of that as well. Yeah, absolutely right. And the recruitment side of volunteers is something that churches do a lot, isn't it? And DBS, as we're talking, is just one element of it. And some people will tie, the ability to serve in a church to a membership. And I think the more churches I've spoken to, there seems to be less emphasis on members only serving, and there is a wider door open for people to get involved. So I feel like there's a bit of change there, and I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that and how churches should think through those issues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're seeing that shift too. That actually belonging. We talk often about belonging, don't we? And how that links to believing and becoming and all of that.
Yeah.
The extent to which we have our doors open to everyone, because of course we want everyone to experience the love of God and to be part of something which sees that living and breathing every day. If then we're going to be asking those people to, or even considering those people being active in certain roles, we may be in a situation where because those people maybe aren't members as we might have seen it back in time, that we do need to think carefully. Well, okay, how long have these people been around? What do we know about them? And what is their motivation to be active in their service within the context of church? So all of those things do have to be thought about carefully. And we would, as a general rule, we would suggest, however you operate, whether you have a membership or not, you really need to afford yourself time to get to know people a little bit. So, 6 months in, to get a sense of where they feel they fit, where they feel they might be active or can contribute, where might they bring their skills, knowledge and experience, but also what's your sense of them? It's again about not wanting to invite unnecessary risk. And I think the reality is that whilst the vast majority of people are well-intentioned and motivated for all the right reasons, there is a minority who aren't. And therefore we must bear that in mind. So the way that I've described this more recently is that we operate with a sense of compassionate curiosity.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, isn't it? Yeah.
So we're not looking under every stone around every corner for someone who may be intent on causing harm to people, but we are open to the possibility that those people do exist and that we may find them in the context of our church. So what do we need to do about that?
Yeah, that's really helpful, isn't it? And even not having necessarily a membership, but having an application form, having an informal interview, talking about people's gifting and where they'd like to serve the church, where they feel like God's equipped them to do that. All these conversations add to that confidence, doesn't it? To reducing the risk of putting somebody into a role. And then being able to go and review that role as well, and review it with the person and support
definitely them. And I think often we kind of take job descriptions and interviews, and really not sure about how that really fits with church or our church, but actually it's in these kind of contexts that they really come into their own. So job descriptions, as a framework, they need to be appropriate for the context. Interviews need to be appropriate for the context. It could range, an interview could range, from anything from a relatively light touch, casual discussion over a coffee to a full on, across the table type interview, depending on the role and all the rest of it. But if going back to job descriptions for a moment, if you don't at least have something that you can give to people that says, this is what we believe the role, the task or the job is, how do we know whether people are capable of fulfilling it? How do they know whether they're capable of fulfilling our expectations? It's kind of fairly basic, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. Some role description and some support to do it is, so important.